Hi, and welcome to Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. We are on day 66, which is Numbers 22 through 24. Bible 365 means that I'm going through the Bible in 365 days. I'm taking 1 year to read through the Bible in order to understand who God is, who we are as people, and why we follow this God, why this God matters, why he is the true God, and how that impacts our entire lives, as my entire life as somebody who believes and follows Jesus, and then ultimately follows the one true God who sent Jesus. And so today we're in the book of Numbers, and we are smack in the middle of this area where Moses is leading the Israelite people. The Israelite people have already traveled to the land of Canaan. They've already sort of turned their backs away because they were scared. And even though God promised them the land of Canaan, they decided that it was too scary and that they probably wouldn't win. So God is essentially punishing them for the next 40 years. And this generation they're punishing them in this generation in order for most of them to die off, in order for them to come then back to the land of Canaan, which is the land that God has promised them through the promise all the way back to Abraham. And Israelites is sort of the people group that we are focused on at this point. This is the group that God has decided to set apart and make holy. And I'm bringing this up because I think this comes up a little bit later in our reading. So these are the sons, the descendants of Jacob. Jacob was renamed Israel, which creates the Israelites, the Israelite people. Jacob had 12 sons, and these are the tribes of the 12 sons that they were enslaved in Egypt, and they were kind of overtaken, and they were enslaved in Egypt for several hundred years. And then God heard them crying out because they were slaves. And he heard them crying out to be saved, and he did. He came in and he saved them, and then he moved them towards the land of milk and honey. And now he is creating what I'm calling a community group with them. So he's creating this more isolated people group. They accept foreigners in, but it's a slightly more isolated people group, and they are set apart to look different than the rest of the world, and he makes them holy. So he's developed this system for them that they come to him and they give him offerings for any of the things that God deems unclean. And then they become a people that are holy to this God. And the priests are this bridge between the two of them. So between God and his Israelite people. But the entire community is considered holy when they do the things that God has given them through his word and through his vision and through Moses to do. So Moses speaks to him directly, and then he lets the people know essentially what they are supposed to be doing to remain holy in God's eyes. So they have turned away from Canaan. They are now sort of a nomadic people. There are people that the tent of meeting, which is where God dwells, when God chooses to move them, the cloud goes up into the sky. They all pack everything up and they move on to the new location. They have moved to a couple locations as of yesterday. They moved to a couple of different places where they asked to walk through. People said no. And then they came out to try and fight with them. And the Lord showed the Israelites favor, and the Lord had them win. And then they started possessing the land. This made people scared. So people start to see that Israel is this moving people group, which I find interesting because where they are right now and where we see that they're coming to, they're about 400 miles away at this point. So there's some distance to where they were and then where they're coming, right? And so imagine, you're in the rest of the world and you hear about this nomadic tribe that starts in some ways conquering certain places around you, right? So remember, they've conquered these people groups. And it just makes me think of, I heard this expression not that long ago, that the Old Testament was Neanderthals. If you read it, you would recognize that that's actually not true. And because they're people exactly like we are. They might not have the technology that we had with our phones and the ability to broadcast all over the world. However, there was a system in which that these people understood that the Israelites were conquering areas. So people knew that they were coming in and they were coming around and they were conquering. Imagine the distance was, several states away. Of course, if you're, living in the United States, we have several states difference, and they go, oh my gosh, these people are coming. They just conquered Florida, and you live in Delaware, and you're like, they're coming. I can see they're coming. It's a big distance. And so somehow they've got information up to them, and they can understand that this people group is coming and it's doing damage, and they're starting to take over areas, and they're starting to take over locations. So Balak finds this out. He is the king of Moab. And so it says Balak, son of Zippor, and he was the king of Moab. So he starts to see everything that is happening, and he's terrified. There are a lot of Israelites at this point, and they're starting to win, and they're starting to gain money, right? Because they're getting things where they win. They're conquering areas and territories. And so he thinks that it's a good idea. If I read verse 1, it says, the Israelites traveled to the plains of Moab and camped along the Jordan across from Jericho. So they've moved up a little bit. And so Balak sees them, and then the Moabites, in verse 4, the Moabites go to the elders of Midian. So what I kind of thought was interesting was Midian, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, was a Midianite. And so I didn't think that they would be afraid of them, because I would assume that they're sort of family, and but this is actually a different area in Midian. It looked like Midian was a little further south prior to this, and now it's a little bit farther north. It's sort of closer to the Moabites, so maybe they moved their people up a little closer to the north, and then Moab and Midian were kind of coming together, and they were trying to find a way to stop the Israelites from taking over their territory. So what they did is they sent, I'm going to try and give a short version of this because there are some things I find interesting in it. They sent word to this guy called Balaam. So what I find interesting about Balaam is he works in divination. And in the Israelite community, actually, they're not allowed to do that. But Balaam speaks to God. And he recognizes who God is. So he knows they're sort of representing the same God as the Israelites, right? It doesn't say a God or a different God or an idol, right? There's a recognition in this story that they all know who God is, and they're all sort of worshiping the same God. But God has actually set apart his Israelites, his chosen people. And so they go to Balaam, and Balaam is, like I said, he's a diviner, or he works in divination, which one of the things that I looked up about what divination is, because it looks like he speaks to him in two different ways. It's things that come to you in dreams, or you can kind of scry in water. You can use tarot cards, which I don't know if that's what they did then. So there are several different ways you can actually divine different things. He spoke to God. And so things he learned things, he started to understand things, and they believed that he was able to give curses or blessings. So he had the power to do those things. And it looks like he had the power to do those things under God, the God that we worship, right? The same God that we worship. So I find that was pretty interesting. So then these people come to Balaam. I'm going to read verse 7 because this is the one about divination. So I'm going to read verse 7. It says, the elders of Moab and Midian left, taking with them the fee for divination. So this is the first time that we see divination in there. And so they go to Balaam and they tell him what Balak said. And they said, listen, we want you to come here and use your powers to curse the Israelite people. Balaam says, I got to ask God. So here we go. He's asking the same God. He's got to go and ask God. And God says, no. God tells him not to do that. So he tells the people go back, they talk to their king, and they say, hey, he said no. And Balak was like, hey, I'm going to give you more money. I'll give Balaam more money. So he gives more money, sends him back. And now this goes a little bit different. So first time he told him no, and then the second time he asks him again. And then Balaam says, nothing's going to make me do this. So if we go to verse, I'm going to go to verse 15, 16. It says, this is what Balak, son of Zippor, says. Do not let anything keep you from coming to me, because I will reward you handsomely and do whatever you say. Come and put a curse on these people for me. Then Balaam answers and says, even if Balak gave me all the silver and gold in his palace, I could not do anything great or small to go beyond the command of the Lord my God. So he says, spend the night here, and then I'll ask what he says. And then God tells him, since they came again, go ahead, but just do what I tell you. Okay, so now Balak has asked him to come put a curse on him. Balaam essentially says, I can only do what God tells me to do. God tells him to go. This is the part I don't really understand. So God tells him to go. And then in this next verse, it says, Balaam got up in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the Moabite officials. Fine. God was very angry when he went, and the angel of the Lord stood in the road to oppose him. So God just gave him approval to go. So I'm not sure why God is angry when he went. This is kind of one of those things that I don't understand the heart of God completely, right? So there are things that I think that through reading I have a great understanding of. Later it says that he doesn't change his mind, he doesn't lie, but he told him to go, right? So then I feel like we have to use context clues to kind of understand what it is that's happening. So the scene itself is strange, right? So the angel of the Lord comes. The donkey's like, hey, the donkey can see what's happening. And the donkey's essentially like, I'm not heading toward that angel because it's going to kill me. And we see the donkey moving, stopping, slowing down, laying down, right? And each time the donkey makes this difference, Balaam's beating the donkey. And then the angel's narrowing the space in which the donkey can protect Balaam from what the Lord is going to do, which is to kill him. And then, of course, after that, the Lord opens up the donkey's mouth in order to enable him to talk. So, what is the point of this message? I'm not 100% sure. And so I don't want to come off as if I'm this scholar that can understand all these deeper meanings. I do feel like there's depth to this story. And maybe it is about us paying particular attention to the things that are around us, right? So being aware of our surroundings, I feel like could be part of the message that we're supposed to learn here. Being aware of things that are stopping us, things that are holding us back from certain things. And maybe that's the Lord putting something in front of our paths. That could be one of the deeper meanings. So I'm not 100% sure what that is. I know we need to recognize that it's a miracle. I'm sure a lot of you have heard this before. So I'm not completely sure of what it is. I'm going to read verse 28 because this is where the donkey actually talks. And so in verse 28, the Lord opens the donkey's mouth and it says to Balaam, what have I done to you to make me beat you these 3 times? So one of the things I do say is that it's the number 3 and the number 7 comes up again. So this number 3 is something that also comes up relatively often. So should we be noticing something that comes up with this? I'm not certain. And then he says, you've made a fool of me. And then the donkey follows up again and says, am I not your own donkey, which you have always ridden that day? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you? So like, he never recognizes that the donkey is talking. So he never says, why are you talking? Like he never questions the fact that the donkey is talking, which in and of itself is really strange. And so should we just note that, again, the people are, how has someone behaved in the past? And then does that represent their behavior in the future? So I'm sort of grasping a little bit at straws here. I didn't want to ignore the story because it's really out there. It's in the book, which I think is really important. It's miraculous, right? Because there's an angel there and there's a talking donkey. And so I think it's a story to dig into a little bit and to try to comprehend. But I don't know if we're necessarily going to come up with some literal views on it, but I do think it's an important story. So even if it's just the matter of being aware if an animal starts to speak, to really listen to whatever it says, that could be your takeaway. If ever your dog starts talking to you, you might want to make a note that it's trying to protect you. All right. So I'm going to move on a little bit. So it says that the angel of the Lord then asked him, why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? I've come here to oppose you because your path is a reckless one before me. So again, did he change his path? I'm not sure. But what we know is maybe too that this is the angel is the donkey has protected him, but the angel is coming to let him know that to really be focused on the Lord in this, right? It's a reckless path. Listen, we can be persuaded by money like this. And I'm sure everyone, again, who's listening is going to say, nope, not me. But there is a reality that there's this expression out there that, like, it's just the right price, right? So it's just, if I haven't gotten you to do it, it's because I just haven't offered you the right price yet. So there are things that we will do for money, for power, for status, right? And so so sometimes we need to be very aware and take extra precautions when going on a reckless path, even if that's the path that God sort of has planned out for us, or we believe that God has planned out for us, because most of us aren't in this place. And there's possibly a few in the world, but I don't know. But most of us aren't in this place where we're actually divining and speaking directly to God, right? So we don't necessarily have this direct, we have the Holy Spirit connection inside of us, but not necessarily God using words and speaking to us either in dreams or where we can see him. And so maybe we need to be careful of the reckless path and where that can take us, where that can lead us. This one thing, it just maybe sparked this idea. There's this new thing that everyone's like deconstructing their faith, right? And a lot of people claim that they're doing it because they just want to know more or understand more. And in some ways it's really good, but in some ways it could be reckless, because there's more often than not, when they're deconstructing, what they're doing is they're actually learning that it isn't true, right? That God isn't the God that they say they are, right? So they're pulling up what they consider all these facts and figures to essentially no longer believe in God, right? To recognize that their self is smarter and there's more truth there, and there's less truth in God. So in some ways it's a good path. We want to understand why we believe what we believe, but in other ways, simple faith is simple faith, right? You love the Lord because the Lord has saved you. And so there's just some peace in that. And going on this reckless path of dividing everything into really small pieces could lead to destruction. And so just, again, just making me think of certain things while we're sitting here, while I'm sitting here talking to you, making me think of all these things that could be considered a reckless path that we need to be aware of. And I am sure there are things in place that are there that are meant to protect us, because there are angels around us. And so, there's some protection there. Whether we listen to that protection or not is something very different. And so here he had his donkey to protect him from that. All right, so moving on, he keeps hearing from God, only say what I tell you. All right, so we're going to move on to verse 22 to chapter 22. We're in verse 36 here. In verse 36, it says, when Balak heard that Balaam was coming, he went out to meet him at the Moabite town on the Aram border. Balak said to Balaam, did I not send you an urgent summons? Why didn't you come to me? Am I really not able to reward you? So here we go, where he's like, okay, listen, this is what I want from you. Don't I have this is the king. This is somebody that's extremely powerful and has a lot of things and power and money and success, right? And so this is somebody that can really offer you a lot of riches. And he's saying, wouldn't you have come? Why wouldn't you have come immediately, right? So he's maybe manipulating him into recognizing that the king is really important and he's going to get what he wants. Balaam doesn't deal with that though. All right, so moving on to Numbers 23. So starting in this section, it says, Balaam said, build me 7 altars here and prepare 7 bulls and 7 rams for me. Balak did as Balaam said, and the 2 of them offered a bull and ram on each altar. So remember, this number 7 again has brought up, and they're offering these offerings to God, right? So they are asking God to curse these people and to bless them instead. So we're going to see what Balaam says. So he says, you stand here by your offering. I'm going to see what God has to say. So at this point, he has seen the Israelite people, right? So he has looked out. The king has said, look out, see all these people, see how they're prepared to kill me. So it says in verse 7, Balaam spoke his message. Balak brought me from Aram, the king of Moab, from the eastern mountains. Come, he said, curse Jacob for me. Come, denounce Israel. And then he says, how can I curse those whom God has not cursed. How can I denounce those whom the Lord has not denounced? So he refuses to curse the people. As a matter of fact, he blesses those people. It says, I see a people who live apart and do not consider themselves one of the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob or number even a fourth of Israel? So he's giving them blessings. Let me die the death of the righteous, and may my final end be like theirs. So very good. All right, so Balak is furious, and he says, okay, you didn't do it over there, but come over in this section and look at them from this side. And so Balaam goes over with him. Same thing. They prepare an altar a second time, asks for a blessing. So verse 23. This is part of the blessing. There is no divination against Jacob, no evil omens against Israel. It will now be said of Jacob and of Israel, see what God has done. And this is interesting too. See what God has done. It says the people rise like a lioness. They rouse themselves like a lion that does not rest till it devours its prey and drinks the blood of its victims. So listen, they're getting it pretty good. They got a lot of power. They're rousing themselves like a lion. But I like that it says it will now be said of Jacob and of Israel, as if they're two different people. I find this interesting because Jacob was renamed, and so they created a nation of Israel. And so I feel like Jacob and Israel are technically the same thing, but Israel is a people group. Jacob is a person that the descendants came from. And so the sort of the whole line has been blessed. Then we come to a third prophecy. So he says, okay, you've done this to me twice. Let's shoot for a third time. I really need you to curse these people. And so we go to chapter 24, and it says, verse 1, now when Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, he did not resort to divination as at other times. So now he's not doing what he did before, whether it was scrying or cards or dice or dreams, whatever it is, right? Going into a trance state. He didn't do any of that. Instead, he turned his face towards the wilderness, looked out and saw Israel encamped, and then the Spirit of God came on him. So now this is a little bit of a different way. So now he's the Spirit of God, and you can hear that the Spirit of God is speaking through this. So it says the prophecy of Balaam, so he's kind of talking about himself, but it's God, son of Beor, the prophecy of one whose eye sees clearly. So now we can know he's kind of confirmed that he does this divination and he does see clearly. The prophecy of one who hears the word of God, who sees a vision from the Almighty, who falls prostrate and whose eyes are open. How beautiful are your tents, Jacob, the dwelling places. So once again, he starts talking amazingly about Israel. We go to verse 8. God brought them out of Egypt. They have the strength of a wild ox. They devour hostile nations and break their bones in pieces. And with their arrows, they pierce them like a lion. They crouch down like a lioness who dares to rouse them. May those who bless you be blessed, and those who curse you be cursed. So he took it even a step further. And instead of just blessing the people, he says, then those who curse you be cursed. So Balak, of course, is angry. And then, so I want to go to verse 11. It says, now leave it once and go home. Balak says this to Balaam. Leave it once and go home. I would reward you handsomely, but the Lord has kept you from being rewarded. And then Balaam says, I told you I was only going to say what God told me to say. So then before we leave, we see this final prophecy from him. It sort of repeats that same thing, right? So God is still speaking through him. The prophecy of Balaam, son of Beor. He says, I see him now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. So we're going to see something special is going to now come from Israel. So Israel is not just a group that is living here that's going to be prospering for this certain amount of time, but we're going to see it's got future. Right now, there is no king in Israel, right? Moses is in charge of them, and there is no king. But we see that they do have a future where there will be a king. A star will rise. It will come out of Jacob. It will come out of Israel. It will crush the foreheads of Moab, the skulls of all the people of Sheth, Edom, Seir, right? So Israel will continue to grow, and others will be conquered by that. So it says Balaam, then Balaam saw Amalek and spoke this message. Amalek was the first among the nations, but their end is going to be destruction. The Kenites, they're going to have problems, right? It says, you Kenites will be destroyed. Asher is going to take you captive, which is one of the people groups of the Israelites. And then he says, alas, who can live when God does this? Then Balaam got up and returned home, and Balak went his own way. So overall, the Israelite people have been blessed. Many other areas have been cursed because they tried to bring a cursing on the Israelite people. And so God has turned everything around for his special, unique, holy people, the Israelites. We are going to see what tomorrow brings, because that's the end for today. There was a lot in there, so I hope that you guys were able to take some time and read on all of these things. Post your comments below. I'd love to hear from you, if at all possible. If you found this to be a blessing, I want you to like it, share it, subscribe to the channel so you can get them every day, because we do these every day for 365 days. Keep reading. See you next time.